Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Mitch Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I will be giving you my review of the brand new CATTB Thumper, which is a Cold War Western Alliance Era 3 tank destroyer, and it's a premium tank. You get this upon completion of level 100 with the new Valiant season, which started this week, if you have the 2000 gold season pass or the ultimate season pass, which is 6000 gold. Before we get into the video, I'd like to say a massive thank you to everyone for waiting and being very patient whilst I was away for a couple of weeks dealing with some personal issues. They're slowly being resolved, and I've had a little bit of a play session on World of Tanks console. I managed to get a little bit of content for you all, so thank you all so much for being patient. Hopefully the content will be a little bit more steadily flowing from now on. And yeah, thank you all to the new subs as well as we march towards, I believe, 1400 subs now, which is absolutely insane. But in today's video, I'll be reviewing this brand new Era 3 premium tank. I'll give you all of the stats that you need to know about this tank, and I will be comparing it to a couple of other Era 3 tanks that are kind of either comparable in their main armament, or they're comparable in the fact that they are a tank destroyer in Era 3. I will also show you the armor viewer in the garage of the CATTB Thumper, and we will have a look at my commander and equipment setup, and then follow up with some gameplay to see how this thing holds up. But this is the artwork of the CATTB Thumper. As you can see, it looks like a generic main battle tank really, but the fact that it has a 140mm main armament means that it is designated as a tank destroyer inside World of Tanks console Cold War game mode, and hopefully that will be a very nice attribute to the tank. And as you can see there, it does have a lot of red in the armor viewer over the turret, so hopefully the turret is nice and strong as well, although the hull doesn't look that strong. Before we get into the stats of the video, let's have a scroll down here and have a look at the skin for the CATTB Thumper. Here it is. You can buy this in the appearance tab for 3000 gold, or if you play World War II, you can get the skin for the FV 4003 Centurion Mark V AVRE, and that's 3900 gold for both the skins. So if you play both modes, it's worth it to get the bundle or the Valiant skin pack. If not, then buy it for 3000 gold in the appearances tab. So let's head over to this Excel spreadsheet where I've got the stats of the CATTB Thumper here on the left. In the middle, we're going to be comparing it to the MBT-70, which is an Era 3 premium tank that a lot of players have now, and it's very comparable in terms of their alpha damage and in terms of their larger caliber main armament. And then we've also got the Type 89, which is the only other tank destroyer at Era 3, and it's a good comparison there. And I'm also going to show you the penetration values of some top Era 3 level tanks to see how the CATTB Thumper holds up. But in terms of this comparison, if you haven't seen my tank on tank comparisons before, green is the best stat, red is the worst, and orange is somewhere in between, and the ones highlighted in yellow are with my commander and equipment setup applied, and I'll talk you through that a little bit later on. But let's start with the bonus in terms of the silver bonus, the XP bonus, and the commander XP bonus. And as there are only two premium tanks in this comparison, let's have a look at the percentages for the CATTB Thumper and the MBT-70. And as you can see, the silver bonus for the CATTB comes out on top at 65% silver, and the fact that this has insane penetration on its standard and premium rounds means you don't have to use many of those premium rounds, and you're going to be penetrating hopefully a lot of the time and making a lot of silver with that 65% silver bonus, which, as I just said, is the best in this comparison. In terms of the XP bonus, it is the worst in this comparison, but only by 10%. You still get a 10% XP bonus, and the Commander XP bonus is the same on both the CATTB Thumper and the MBT-70 at 10%, which is very nice indeed. So a little boost to your Silver XP and Commander XP. And now we're going to get on into the raw stats of the vehicle and compare as well to the Type 89. Let's start with the hit points, and as you can see, the CATTB, or the Thumper as I might just call it for this video, has a whopping 3,750, so towards the higher end of Era 3 in terms of hit points, more than the MBT 70 and much more than the Type 89, so that's a good tick for the Thumper there. Plenty of HP to take quite a few rounds during your battles. In terms of the view range, it has 525 meters, which is the same as the MBT 70, but falls a little way short of the Type 89, but with the playstyle, it doesn't matter an awful lot, and you can boost that up depending on your commander and equipment setup and whether you use combat rations as a consumable. But moving on into the mobility of the Thumper, as you can see, it has a very large engine power, a little bit less than the MBT's 1475 horsepower, but at 1450 horsepower this has a big old engine, and the MBT 70 and the Thumper dwarf the Type 89's pathetic 730 horsepower engine. However, they are larger tanks, and the power to weight ratios are relatively similar on all three of these tanks. You can see that the best in this comparison is the MBT 70 at 27.84 power to weight. The Thumper a little bit behind that at 24.46, but still a pretty good power to weight. And just a little bit behind the Thumper is the Type 89 at 23.55. So looking good in terms of the mobility of this so-called tank destroyer. How about the top forward speed? Well, it has the best in class top forward speed at 67.6 kilometers an hour. It beats the MBT 70 and the Type 89. In terms of its reverse speed, it's not going to be as good as the MBT 70, as that can go forwards and backwards at the same 64 kilometers an hour. However, it is much quicker than the Type 89, which is the other tank destroyer in this comparison, and at 38.6 kilometers an hour in reverse, the CATTB Thumper can get off of those ridge lines very quickly indeed. It's not great news in terms of the whole traverse. As you can see, 34 degrees a second is the worst in this comparison, so you might want to consider moving that up just a little bit. But when you do get your momentum, it's going to feel a little bit more nimble. The MBT 70 has a much greater whole traverse, and even the Type 89 can traverse its hull much better. And in terms of the turret traverse, 36 degrees a second is the same on all of these vehicles, and that will be boosted up by your gun handling skills, as I'll show you on in just a little bit. But it's pretty good news. If it's only falling behind by a little bit compared to the MBT 70, that's no slouch in terms of its mobility, and hopefully you'll be able to get to where you need to be on the battlefield and put your gun to work, which is the main attribute and the main reason you're going to want to be playing this tank. So the gun then, what gun does it have? It has a 140mm gun, which deals 700 alpha damage, and the piece de la resistance of this tank is the penetration. It has standard APF SDS penetration of 854mm, which is absolutely phenomenal. You should be butchering through most armoured plates you come across. And if you want to use the premium rounds, it does drop a little bit, but you do regain your penetration over distance. You're not going to lose any like with the APF SDS rounds. With your heat rounds, it's 750mm of penetration, if you can manage to get them to work. Obviously, you've got to avoid shooting the spaced and the composite armour that protects against heat, ATGM and HE ammunition. If you can get that to work, you'll be having a nice 750mm of penetration at any range you are firing the round. In terms of your standard APF SDS rounds, they do have a fantastic shell velocity of 1605 meters a second, and if you choose to use those heat rounds, it's 1050 meters a second, so it does drop significantly, so definitely bear that in mind if you make use of the heat rounds. In terms of the shell velocity compared to the other tanks in this comparison, you can see that it's not quite as good as the Type 89, which has 1730 meters a second on its standard APF SDS rounds, but it does beat the MBT 70. And in terms of the shell velocity on its heat rounds, you can see that it does beat the MBT 70's heat rounds, but as the 120mm caliber gun on the Type 89 fires APF SDS as its premium ammunition choice, it does have 1705 meters a second shell velocity, so much better than the Thumper and the MBT 70, so definitely take that into account. One thing to note is that the Thumper doesn't have a third ammunition selection, as you can see, whereas the MBT 70 has access to ATGMs as its third ammunition choice, and the Type 89 can fire HE if you so wish. So that's why I haven't coloured these in or compared them, because the Thumper doesn't have a third ammunition choice. In terms of the alpha damages then, you can see that the MBT 70 is the best in this comparison. It has a 152mm caliber gun, which is slightly larger than the Thumper and much far larger than the Type 89. 80 more alpha damage on the MBT 70, but the Thumper does have that 700 alpha damage on both of its rounds, which is more than the Type 89 and even more than the HE on the 120mm on the Type 89. In terms of penetration, it's highlighted in green, which means it's the best in this comparison, and by some way, on its standard APF SDS rounds. With this 140mm caliber gun on the Thumper, you are absolutely demolishing the penetration of the MBT 70, which is that tank's main drawback. You are doubling and adding a little bit extra to the penetration on your standard rounds, and you're even better than the Type 89, which has 590mm of penetration. And with your premium heat rounds, you have 750mm of penetration, which is better than the 430 heat rounds on the MBT 70 by a lot, and it's also better than the premium APF SDS rounds on the Type 89, so you have absolutely fantastic penetration, two different ammunition selections, and you should be going through a lot of the plates, or almost all of the plates you're going to come across, if you know where you are shooting your tanks. And of course that is down to you to learn the weaknesses of other tanks. I'll try and help out as best as possible during the videos. But of course you can always go into the Armour viewer and look at the different tanks if you are struggling to penetrate them on the battlefield, and I highly recommend doing that. And some other people do put up Armour reviews on YouTube, and definitely check them out because they will be very helpful, and hopefully I'll have the time soon to put up a few of my own. But best penetration, good shell velocity on your standard rounds, and very nice alpha damage. We're now going to have a little look at the gun handling and DPM, but before we do that, I'd like to draw your attention here over to the right, where I've highlighted some penetration of the standard and premium rounds of some of the top level Era 3 tanks, and I've also included the M60AX and the Type 59D, which are your other two Era 3 premium choices, to give you a good indication of just how good the penetration is on the Thumper. So you can see here, Leopard 2A5, Challenger 2, M1A2 Abrams don't even reach 600 on the standard rounds, whereas you're packing 854 on the Thumper, which is over 200 more, which is absolutely fantastic. And your other two premium tanks, the M60AX and the Type 59D, they fall behind by more than 200mm of penetration on the Type 59D. Just goes to show you how good the penetration is on the Thumper. And as you can see here, not one of these goes more than 606mm of penetration on their standard rounds. And yeah, again, just reiterates, you shouldn't be firing too many heat rounds at all, and you shouldn't need them. And they are absolutely fantastic standard rounds, which should save you from having to fire the slightly more expensive heat rounds on the Thumper. And in terms of the highest here in this list, over here on the right, in terms of the highest premium penetration, you're looking at the 740 millimeters of penetration on the M1A2 Abrams premium rounds. That is still 10 millimeters off of the heat rounds of the Thumper, and it is still a long way off of the standard rounds of the Thumper. So yeah, It really is a penetration king and king of the penetration stats at Era 3. In terms of the gun handling then and the DPM, let's have a look and see what it's like for the CATTB Thumper, and unfortunately a lot of it is covered in red, which means it's the worst in this comparison, but let's have a little bit of a further look and see just how bad it is, or whether it is only slightly off the other tanks. Well, 2.5 second aim time is the same as the MBT-70, which is a higher caliber gun, which is a little bit unfortunate, although of course you can get these figures down to a reasonable level with a good commander and equipment setup, but the best in this comparison goes to the Type 89 at 1.9 second aim time. In terms of the accuracy on this 140mm caliber gun, it's even more than the 152mm caliber gun on the MBT-70, which again is a little bit disappointing. But with the fantastic commander skills you can get now in Water Tanks console, it doesn't matter too much. I've got my accuracy down to 0.27, so it just goes to show that it's not the best in this comparison. That goes to the 0.22 base accuracy of the Type 89, which absolutely obliterates the MBT-70 and the CATTB Thumper, but that has got a 120mm caliber gun, so it is a lot smaller. In terms of the DPM, again, the Thumper is the worst in this comparison. It falls about 500 damage per minute worse than the MBT-70, and it is about 800 damage per minute less than the Type 89, but you do have to put into contention that the Thumper has the best standard penetration, and you're going to be more likely to be penetrating your rounds with the CATTB Thumper than with the other two tanks, especially the MBT-70, so take that with a pinch of salt. If you're penetrating your rounds consistently, your overall damage per minute, or your technical damage per minute, will most likely be, for most players, better with the CATTB Thumper, so that's definitely something to think about. DPM isn't always everything. It's very situational, although it is of course nice to have, and you can see the best in this comparison goes to the Type 89 at 4.7k damage per minute. So because of that damage per minute, it means that you reload base for 700 alpha damage in 10.6 seconds, and as you can see here on the right, I've managed to get that down to 7.93 seconds, which is very respectable indeed. You carry 40 rounds of ammunition, which is the worst in this comparison, 8 less than the MBT-70, and 20 less than the 120mm caliber gun on the Type 89. And lastly, in terms of your gun depression, 9 degrees, which is the joint best in this comparison with the MBT-70, and that is 1 degree better than the Type 89, which has 8 degrees. And in terms of gun elevation, all three of these tanks have 20 degrees of gun elevation, which is good news. So all in all, it's pretty good news for the CATTB Thumper. It might not be best in class in some of these stats, but when you take into consideration the standard penetration and the great shell velocity you have on your standard APF SDS rounds, and that high alpha damage, which is good for trading with lower caliber guns, you should be golden, and you do have that nice mobility as well as your nice 3,750 hit points. So that's that in terms of the raw stats of the Thumper. I'm going to tell you my commander and equipment setup and how that affects the base stats, and then we're going to get stuck into having a look at the armor viewer, then get stuck into the gameplay. So in terms of the equipment that I have chosen to personally run and that I prefer on the CATTB Thumper, I run improved ventilation, advanced loader and traction system. And in terms of the commander skills, I run 6th Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Run and Gun, Armor Angling and Track Mechanic. If you do run that same setup, you'll be looking at a view range of 558 meters, which is definitely not as good as some of the tanks you're going to get in Era 3. It's good enough to be able to spot things within medium range, and the playstyle that you're going to be playing with this tank and the true vision system that's in place in Cold War, it's not the end of the world. In terms of the mobility, because I use a traction system, I've boosted my top forward speed to 74.36 km an hour, and my reverse speed is now a very nice 42.46 kilometers an hour. The hull traverse has gone up just a little bit at 37.4 degrees a second, and the turret traverse has gone up to 42.73 degrees a second, which is very nice indeed, meaning that you're just that little bit more mobile. I felt like the power to weight is already good enough. However, you might want to invest in an advanced powertrain and make it even faster and catching up to the levels of the MBT70, but that's completely up to you. In terms of the gun handling and DPM then, I now have an aim time of 2.35 seconds, which is a little bit long for Cold War, but I feel that it still works because of that great base accuracy. If you don't aim in all of the way, maybe 60 to 80% of the way in, it usually hits its mark with that 0.27 accuracy. The DPM has now gone up to 5,292, which is very nice indeed, which means that I now reload in 7.93 seconds for that 700 alpha damage. So I've gone all out for sort of DPM and gun handling with a little bit of mobility. Of course, you can tweak that around. That's just what I've chosen. And in terms of the commander skills, I run Armour Angling to reduce the amount of damage that I take. You have a fairly large amount of hit points for a tank destroyer designation anyway, and reducing the amount of damage you're taking by 5% is always going to be good. And track mechanic, because you don't have good hull armor. I want to get my tracks on quicker, and that improves the repair speed of the tracks by 25%, so that's why I've chosen to use that. The rest is gun handling skills, rapid loading to help the DPM, and Sixth Sense and Born Leader I highly recommend as the first two skills you choose on every one of your commanders. So that's it for the stats of the CATTB Thumper and the comparison that we have done here. We're now going to skip on to the garage, have a look at the armor profile of the Thumper, then we're going to get stuck into the gameplays. So we are in the garage and we're going to have a look at the armour of the CATTB Thumper, and as always with Cold War vehicles, it's very difficult to tell the effectiveness of the armour because we don't have something like tanks.gg that the World War II players can use to show the exact thicknesses or effectiveness of the armour. So I'm going to tell you what I know from experience, show you the weakest parts and the strongest parts, and then we're going to get stuck into the first of three gameplays. So the strongest part of the Thumper are these two sections here of 580mm of armour. They're sloped backwards and upwards as well, which increases their effectiveness, and there's spaced armour behind this, and then there is a 25mm plate to the left and right as well, so it's very effective against HE, heat and ATGM. Only really powerful APF, SDS, APDS rounds will go through the front of this turret, like something like the Thumper shooting at itself with that 854mm of penetration, but you will have to shoot these two sections here flat on and in the middle to have a chance of going through, and even then, if it's using 9 degrees of its gun depression from like down here, it's a very difficult penetration indeed. The best place to shoot the turret from the front, especially if it's using a little bit of its gun depression, is either this 370mm section here underneath the gun. I found that this goes through even with mid sort of caliber guns in era 3, or you can go a little bit further down to this 300mm section, which is basically the mantlet, and I found that this can get penetrated very easily indeed. So just shoot under the gun and you will have your best chance. You can go for the turret ring, but most likely it will auto ricochet down into your tracks or away from the tank, and it's best just to shoot this section here. Next, we'll look on top of the tank, but this only really applies if it's not using any of its gun depression and you are maybe slightly above the tank. There are a few sections or a couple of sections that you can go for. You have this viewport to the left, and you also have this hatch and this cupola to the right. And I found that it's best to shoot to the right because the one on the left has a very slim chance of going through because there's 101mm of armour behind it. So this little circle to the right can be overmatched by all 115mm caliber guns or higher. If you are able to hit that, you will overmatch that with those caliber guns that I've just mentioned. So that's definitely a section to shoot at, and if you're above it, this turret becomes weaker, especially against heat. You can shoot down on it and you should be able to go through. In terms of the side armour, it's pretty terrible on this tank. The strongest part of the side is this section here of 60mm, and this is overmatched by all 181mm caliber guns or higher. However, there's an even thinner part of the side armour which is absolutely terrible. This is 30.2mm of side armour, and this will be overmatched if I do my calculations for you quickly. So 30.2 times by 3 plus 1, so you're going to need a 91.6mm caliber gun or higher to overmatch this part of the tank. The only reason you would side scrape is to bait enemies into shooting heat or ATGMs or HE into the side, because there is spaced armour over the tracks, which I'll show you in a second. APF SDS or APDS will overmatch at that caliber that I have just mentioned, and the only other real reason to side scrape is just to give your opponents less of your target to hit and try and get them just to absorb it into your tracks. But the side armour isn't very good, especially from the side. One thing to note is that from the rear you can track and damage it in place, however from the front you cannot. You can just track it but you won't be able to deal any damage, so that's definitely something to know. The lower plate, 50.8mm thick on the front, but it is sloped backwards and there's some spaced armour behind it. It will be easy to penetrate with mid to sort of lower caliber guns from the front if you shoot towards the lower middle portion. There is spaced sections behind this, but they're not particularly useful. There's 101mm as you can see, but the penetration in area 3, you'll be able to go through this. Just don't fire heat or HE or ATGMs at the front of this tank, because it's not very useful at all. The upper plate is an auto ricochet angle for, at the front I should say, the part that's not highlighted in purple now as you can see, but this section here of 38mm of armour can be overmatched, and I'll tell you the caliber of gun you need to overmatch. If I just quickly do the calculation, you're going to need a 115mm caliber gun or higher to overmatch this section of the hull, and the more you go up, obviously the weaker it becomes, I guess, especially against heat, and you can go down onto the upper plate. But for lower caliber guns, it's going to be an auto ricochet. You can always angle up at 45 degrees and try and get them to shoot off the sort of front portion of your hull. But yeah, 115mm caliber gun is the thing you need to keep in mind for the upper plate of this tank. And that's pretty much all you need to know. The side and rear is absolutely terrible. The tracks themselves are 30mm of spaced armour themselves. The rear has 6mm of side skirt spaced armour, and the front has, if we can go and find it with all the different colours, I believe 69mm of spaced armour over the front. So shoot towards the rear when it's side scraping, shoot below the gun. If you're above it, you can overmatch the hatch to the right. Lower plate's easy to go through. You can track and damage at the rear tracks but not from the front, and apart from that get to the side and rear. But this tank's very good hold down, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to play, and we're now going to find out what kind of thing it's capable of on the battlefield as we head into the first of 3 gameplays. So we are 30 seconds into the first gameplay of today's video, and we are here in the Thumper and we're on Cao Bang. We're in the sort of southern section at the moment, just covering our base. I'm just trying to find some nice crossfire on the tanks that are heading along the south towards our base. You can see that the aim time is a little bit long, especially when you've just stopped moving. The bloom does get quite big, so you might want to consider taking out the traction system and improving the aim time if you find it troublesome. However, I prefer to have the slightly better traverse speeds on the whole, as it does help you when you're turning, as it turns a little bit like a boat, especially when you're not up to top speed. But you can see that you definitely do slap even when you low roll. We did 616 damage there, which is a substantial low roll, and the higher rolls that you don't often get in Cold War are still very nice in this tank. And we're just trying to find some crossfire. We're sitting at sort of mid to long range here, using this gun and the penetration at distance. Of course, the longer the distance, you're going to lose more penetration with the APF SDS rounds, and as you can see, I only carry 2 heat rounds because they're very difficult to use against all of the composite and spaced armour in Era 3 of Cold War. So I highly recommend taking more APF SDS rounds, as I find them more useful, and they do have more penetration and much better shell velocity, meaning you have to give less lead. But we have a Challenger 1 in front of us, and at sort of nearly 600 meters, every shot is just butchering this Challenger 1 and his hull down, and this is just showing you how great the penetration is on this tank. And of course, to have a tank now with higher DPM would be useful, but only if we were penetrating the rounds, and of course you have to balance the consistency of the pens to the DPM, and I feel like this is a nice middle ground. It's got a respectable DPM but exceptional penetration, meaning it's very consistent, and I found it's a very enjoyable tank to play. We're up to 3.3k damage in the first 3 minutes, and we're just taking shots when we are able to, trying to preserve the 3,750 hit points. From the front it's very strong, especially when you are only hull down, but when people start to come up close to you, get shots on your lower plate, get to your sides and rear, it can become a lot weaker. You can see there that the boosted reverse speed with the traction system helped there to reverse out of the way, and we managed to sort of help our BMP3 try and get out of the way as best as possible. And now I'm just trying to reverse up out of trouble, always trying to keep my tank front facing the enemy so they've got a chance of bouncing off my front. And if someone comes and tries to shoot ATGMs at me, I'm trying to either sort of wiggle to get them to shoot the side of my track so they get absorbed, or the front of my turret and the lower plate where there is lots of that composite armour. So now it's just end game, trying to get as much damage as possible. You can see that it does bounce quite a bit. 1500 damage in Era 3 bounce isn't too bad for a tank destroyer designation, and we managed to do 8.1k damage before we died. Unfortunately, we are down by 3 tanks, and it looks like we're going to be not able to take this one down, so I'm going to skip forward to the end of this very quick first game and show you the end result. So unfortunately, we don't manage to take that one down, or our teammates don't manage to take that one down, I should say. We still finished 4th on our team, and we dealt a respectable 8.1k damage. That's a nice 418,000 profit with a premium account and a ×2 booster in a loss, and that's 1,575 damage blocked. So we're now going to head swiftly on into the second game and hope we can pick up a win. Hello again, we are 30 seconds into the second battle here on Thiepval Ridge in the Thumper. I was going towards the south of this map, but my teammates were lagging a little bit behind me, showing you that this tank is no slouch. We're going to come into this ridge here and see if we can get some shots or some crossfire and side shots on tanks that like to situate themselves on that sniper hill near the enemy's base. But we've noticed that we are getting flanked now, and there our enemies and my teammates have arrived, so we're going to reverse up, try and go through the drive wheel there of the Leopard 2A4. Probably a bad move shooting there. Probably could have just gone for one of the cupolas or through the side of the turret. But we get some nice assistance damage for our tracking shot, and then we're going to move forward, see if we can maybe take a shot for our teammates or try and bounce a shot and clear out this section. And once we've cleared out this sort of southern middle portion of the map, my next move would be to try and get crossfire and pincer the enemies who are situated on their sniper hill in that sort of F890 location. So we get a nice shot there through the upper part of the track into the upper hull on that Merkava, and our friend comes in the BMP, puts a shot into us. We know the Cheruski, we put a shot into him. I give him a little bit of a salute, pop my smoke consumable, which I use, and we both go on our merry way. And the reason for me using the smoke consumable on this tank, I mean, it's a tank destroyer, right? I'm going to have to use smoke consumable to try and help the concealment out a bit, but when you get into these jams where tanks have your lower plate and they're up close and personal at short to mid range, you do become very weak indeed. This tank does not like to be flanked. It likes to have all of its enemies front on and hold down, using it 9 degrees of gun depression and bouncing the shells. So that's why I carry the smoke consumable. But if you're really comfortable in this tank, you might want to consider dropping that, or dropping the medkit, say, and maybe putting combat rations to help the DPM and gun handling out and view range, etc. by 5%. But we've now managed to clear this little section here. There's one enemy to our left. We're going to flank him with the decent mobility of the Thumper get a nice shot in there. We don't let that one fully aim. We're trying to help our teammate out here, and we're not going to have the DPM by about a second to help our M1A2. So I do flag and say sorry to let him know and acknowledge I was trying to help him. But now we're kind of safe at the moment. I'm going to try and go hold down on the ridge lines and the rocks in front of me, and I'm always trying to find some rubble or rocks or ridge lines to go hold down, trying to keep every enemy frontally, and this is when this tank will excel at these mid to long range engagements where you have enemies that are lit up by your allies, and you can rely on your very, very dangerous gun indeed to put the hurt into the enemy. Whenever I'm popping up here, I am getting lit up from the rear, so there's definitely a tank behind me or to the side, and I believe a teammate did flag up and let us know. It is our friend in the BMP3, the Cherusky. I try and turn my turret around as quickly as possible, and the fact that we used the gun handling skills means our gun traverses or our turret traverses much quicker. We snap it round. Guess where the Cherusky went in the BMP3? Into the smoke, and we managed to take him out of the game, and a dangerous player taken out in a very dangerous light tank. And now we can move forward a ridge and use this one to get shots in at the enemies that are situated in that sniper hill. And whilst I've been talking, we've managed to pick up 5.3k direct damage and 2.6k assistance. And you can see it's a very consistent gun. It might not have that flashy DPM, but you've got to make the most of when you are loaded and make sure you pen your damage. You're still going to have very good games. It's a respectable amount of DPM and exceptional penetration, like I believe I said in the first replay in today's video. And now I'm going to move forward, pop the smoke consumable to try and distract the enemy, and I'm going to try and duck into cover, and this will prove to be a little bit of a downfall in this game for me. I should have sat back, being a little bit more passive, and that's something that I've got to learn in certain tanks, but I always want to get stuck in, and you're going to find out what happens when you allow yourself to be flanked in this tank. We don't manage to clear this section out quickly enough as the enemies are playing smartly and tightly, going hold down behind solid cover as well. And unfortunately we aren't managed to take out these tanks as quickly as I'd hoped, because I wanted to get up on that sniper hill and hopefully get at the enemies that are defending their capture circle. I'm going to switch to heat rounds here as the APF SDS isn't going through the top of the Challenger 2, and I believe there's a Leopard there as well. Unfortunately the heat isn't going through as well, so I just switch back for the better shell velocity on the APF SDS, and hopefully we're going to reload in time to at least get a shot into one of these tanks. It's the Leopard 2A5 and Challenger 2. We go for a shot there through that gap on that Challenger 2, and as you can see, even when you're 60 to 80% aimed in, this gun is still pretty decent. The bloom is pretty large, but you have got a large caliber gun, and when you hit, you definitely do slap the enemies. I don't know if you have noticed in the games already, and I believe you will notice in the next gameplay that's coming up, this gun caliber does do a lot of fires to the enemy team, and it also ammo racks. It damages modules because of the gun caliber, which is another bonus to this tank, and you might want to consider the commander skill or perk that I've forgotten the name of that does help with the critical damage that your ammunition does or your gun does in the game. So now it's 2 tanks apart from us and the enemy team. Unfortunately for us, we are the one on 5 tanks. We don't get a shot there into that Challenger as he falls back, which is a little bit of a shame. Sometimes, although you have that penetration, it does lose that penetration over distance, and it does struggle against thick sort of spaced armour or exceptionally well angled armour. We bounce a shell there on the M1A2, and unfortunately we do get taken out, and if I had sat back a little bit more, I might have managed to get more out of this game. I'm not sure we managed to win the game, but I wouldn't have been flanked and I would have been able to cover the capture circle. So I'm trying to let my teammates know, you need to sort of use your hit points now and try and take out as many tanks as possible, because you will just get outnumbered. But we're going to skip forward to the end of this replay and then see how we did. that's the end of that one then. Unfortunately, another defeat in the Thumper, and I'm trying to give you an indication of some general battles that I'm having, whether it's defeats or victories. We finish on top of our team there, making a small misplay at the end, not being more passive, but another nice profit of 474,000 silver, 3 kills, 8.1k direct damage, 3.2k assistance, and we blocked some more damage at 535 blocked. Just showing you that it's very good when you have enemies lit up for you. It's not brilliant at spotting for itself, but when you do get this gun singing in a hold down position and you're able to stay in a position that protects your hull and your lower plate, then you can be very powerful and very impactful, especially with the amount of hit points you have. So that's it for the second game. We're now going to head into the best game that I've had in the Thumper so far, and I'll see you in that one shortly. So welcome to the third and final gameplay of today's video. I'm sure there'll be more gameplays in the CATTB Thumper on this channel, as I really do quite like this tank, and I think it's a pretty good reward for level 100 of the season pass. Unfortunately, with Thiepval Ridge, when you're crossing this field trying to get into position, you do take some damage from tanks that get early into position, depending on what spawn and where you spawned. We take one shell, but we now manage to get into a hold down position, and this was the first ever game I had played in the Thumper, and you're going to see that maybe I should have just left it at this game, called it quits, and just told everyone that I had 100% marked it and never played it again, because from here on out it looked like I was having defeat after defeat, and unfortunately the win rate that I've been having in this tank isn't astonishing. It's still decent enough. I've been having a fair few wins as well, but at the crucial points in games it can struggle to be really impactful. But this one's a little bit different, and I won't spoil it for you. You're going to have to see what happens in this game. We're starting here, hold down in G5, and we're getting round after round into this T72. I believe it's a T72BU. With this fantastic penetration on the Thumper, we really are putting the hurt into this T72BU. We've got 3.4k damage already right through the turret. He thinks it's safe, but no one's safe from this very dangerous 140mm caliber gun. Using the true vision system, scanning the ridge lines, and I feel very safe here, sat hold down. As you can see, we've blocked 1020 damage, rocking backwards and forwards a little bit to try and increase the effectiveness of those two thickest parts of the frontal turret armour. There is a Thumper there in the distance, and we're going to try and go for a shot looping into the top of his tank, and it looks like we've managed to go through one of those overmatchable ports on the front, so it definitely can happen, especially when you do have a higher caliber gun. And now we're going to see if we can either finish that T72BU off, or maybe fend off this heavy tank that is pushing round and trying to threaten me and my friend here to the left. I'm going to let it aim in for a little bit longer than we have been, and we take out that T72BU. And what a nice feeling it is to be able to take out tanks that are on sort of anywhere between 500 to 700 damage. It just means that you're very impactful when they're on a small number of hit points, and you can pick up a lot of kills in this tank. We do get a shot there into the light tank. He manages to go straight through us, showing you that when you do give them your hull and lower plate, it really isn't too strong. We get one into the Type 85-3 as we're reversing. It turns a little bit like a boat, as you can see at times, but we're going to have to just go forward and risk getting a bit of damage to help out our teammate now. We get one into the Type 85-3. I lazily auto-aim it. We get one fire. He puts it out. And then once we've reloaded, we make sure we aim, go right through him again and set that tank on fire. And we're up to 8.1k damage in the first 3.5 minutes of this battle. We're tracking that VFM5 in the distance using the fantastic shell velocity that the standard APF SDS rounds have. 1605 meters a second. You don't need to give too much lead at all. And now we're going to use the nice reverse speed of the Thumper to try and get into a safer position behind these rocks and see if we cannot take out that light tank or turn our attentions to the town, because it looks like we are losing tanks left, right and centre at the moment. And at the very least, I want to try and get 10k out of this game if it's going to be a loss. But hopefully we might be able to have a bit of an impact and take this one down for the team. So that T-72BU gets into cover in just the right time. Unfortunately for our friendly there, he takes damage intended for me. We track that leopard in place and we get a little bit more tracking for that. We're up to 1700 blocked, showing you that even the hull armor can block occasionally. And now it's all about trying to get as many shots in as possible. We're down by 5 tanks and we're just going to have to try and get round after round into these tanks. We get another one into the Challenger 2 there. And now I'm going to go for a face hug, or try and go for a face hug and try and get him to shoot our upper plate. We track him in place, he repairs, we're reversing out of trouble, trying to make it as hard as possible for the enemies to pen me. We get a shot into the Thumper there, we angle it 45 degrees and he bounces off our upper plate at an auto ricochet angle. And yeah, a very frustrating end to the game, a very flustering end to the game, very quick pace there. And it does end with a nice cliff dive in a minute, and that's the best game I've had in the Thumper in terms of damage and the impact. I've had quite a lot of wins as well in sort of 3 to 6k damage games, but I wanted to show you some defeats to show you that it can be very impactful, but sometimes it's just not enough in terms of the armor. You do have to think about your positioning and how you play this tank to get the most out of it. It's not going to be as powerful as something like a main battle tank with superb armor, but you're still going to have decent games now and again, and it's a little bit of a different sort of tank for players that don't like the MBT-70. With the poor penetration that tank has, it's a flavour of the MBT-70, a little bit less mobility but a lot more pen, and in my opinion a lot more fun, and it's much better hold down. So if you have the MBT-70 and you like the alpha but you hate the tank, maybe give this one a go, and I think it's a pretty good reward. I'd pay 6k for the Ultimate Season Pass if this was the reward. It just turns out that you can get it for 2,000 gold, so that's a big thumbs up for me for the Cold War players of World of Tanks console. But in that game we picked up 638,000 silver with a premium account and a 2x silver booster. That 65% silver bonus coming in clutch there. 2 kills, 12.3k direct damage, 514 assistance. And in the end we actually managed to block 2,780 damage, showing you that the hull and the lower plate are pretty poor on the side, but you know, wiggle around, there's some auto ricochet angles and the turret's very strong. So I hope that you've enjoyed today's review or found it helpful. If you have, let me know in the comments and give the video a like, it would really help me out. Thank you all so much for your patience while I was away, and until the next video, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.